welcome back to our English-speaking virtual tasting. The idea is to give you an opportunity to practice your tasting skills using the WSET systematic approach to tasting. And what we will do is we'll go through the wine together, and I'll first talk a little bit about the level 2 approach. And then we'll talk about if there are any differences for the level 3 systematic tasting approach to tasting, where the differences lie. So I'll give you a little introduction to the wine, some details about the grape, the wine making, maybe the maturation, and then we will taste through together. I ask you all to mute your microphones. I think our team have made that possible anyway. But if you do have questions, please write them in the chat, and either Jacopo will help me by answering them during the tasting, or I will try and pick some questions if I can spot them in time to talk either afterwards or as it comes up during the tasting. And for those of you in Verona, I particularly would like to welcome you back with some fantastic British weather that I seem to have conjured today. I'm not quite sure how I managed that, but I am at least feeling very at home with this lovely grey, rainy day. And what better an evening to open one of my favourite Italian wines, my favourite styles, something a little bit bigger, richer, heartier for us to taste today. So our wine this evening is the Frescobaldi Castelgiocondo Brunello di Montalcino DOCG, and this is the 2014 vintage. See, that's going to become quite important. If you haven't got this particular wine, hopefully you're tasting something of similar characteristics, 100% Sangiovese with a little bit of age. The important thing is really to be looking for the characteristics of the grape and beginning to recognize the structural elements in the wine, because a lot of that is coming from the grape here. Because again, we're talking about a wine that is 100% one grape variety. So you can really see what the grape brings to the table, but also what winemaking techniques have an impact. So Frescobaldi have their vineyards for the Castelgiocondo in southwest Montalcino. This is in Camigliano. And this is quite a particular area of the kind of, we talk about the Montalcino clock face, this kind of compass of sites within Montalcino. And the southwest tends to be warmer and drier than the other areas. So this is quite important for Sangiovese, because Sangiovese doesn't like huge amounts of heat. What it really relies on is a long growing period. And the thing that's really particular about the Castelgiocondo is that they're picking from 2 subzones within their sites in Camigliano. And this means that they are able to treat their Sangiovese very carefully. In particular, the 2 things that define their vineyard sites for this wine are a little bit of altitude. So they're growing their Sangiovese at around 300 meters above sea level. This is unusual for the southwest. There's not a lot of altitude to be found there. And also they're on galestro soils. So this similar kind of clay limestone blend that we also find in Chianti. So there are 2 things that are really factored in when they're doing this. One of the things that they particularly wanted was this altitude, because the 2014 in particular was quite a difficult vintage. For those of you who know your vintages, it was quite a cold, rainy summer, but it did have a warm, long September. And September gave us great diurnal shift in this area, particularly at high altitudes. So at these kind of medium altitude sites, it's 300 meters, Frescobaldi really took advantage of the diurnal shift in September before harvest. So when I talk about this, this is this fluctuation between warm daytime temperatures and cold nighttime temperatures. This is particularly important in the latter stages of ripening for a grape like Sangiovese, because this helps maintain acidity in this warm, dry area, but it also helps maintain aromatics in the grape. And that's what we should be looking for in this wine. We should be aiming to find this retention of acidity, but this lovely aromatic. Now, the reason the acidity is so important, remember, is that Brunello di Montalcino, the DOCG, has strict aging laws. Okay, so minimum aging in barrel and bottle and a year. So for example, we would expect for your normal Brunello di Montalcino for this to be 4 years. Okay, a continual aging process of 4 years. Frescobaldi are actually aging for an extra year. So when it comes out of oak, so they age in barrique, which are these small 225 litre, and in botte, which are these really large oak casks. So they're getting this blend of new oak in the barrique and old oak in the botte. And they're doing this for a little bit of extra time, and then they're leaving the aging for an extra year in the cellar. So this wine really has time in both oak, new and neutral oak. So you should expect oak flavor as well as oxidation, and this maturation period in the cellar. So we're really going to be looking for primary characteristics from the grape. Remember these aromatics, hopefully this acidity, the tannins you would expect from Sangiovese. You're also going to be looking for the secondary characteristics. So we should have clear oak character on this wine. Yeah? It's been in new oak, not just old oak. So you should be looking for those spices, that kind of smoky wood char character. And then finally, because it's the 14, you've had the extra maturation in bottle, not only in the cellar, but obviously it's been sitting around with me again. So we really should begin to see this not only in the flavors and aromas. Remember, maturation also demonstrates itself in the appearance of a wine. So far when we've been looking at our wines, we've been really looking for this kind of bright ruby color in our wines. This is where we would begin to see the change. Okay, we should be expecting to begin to see this kind of garnet characteristic, this slightly orange brown color coming into the wine. Okay, another couple of details for you. Hand-picked, so very carefully selected, but importantly, stainless steel fermentation. So they're doing very careful temperature controlled fermentation. And as a result, remember I'm talking about the importance of the site selection, the maintaining of aromatics. The temperature controlled stainless steel should allow the maintenance of aromatics throughout the winemaking process. So it's only really until we get this aging in barrel that we start to see the impact on the wine. So I hope you all have your wine primed and ready. I have mine here. I'm going to give it a bit of a swirl, because if you know Sangiovese, and particularly Brunellos, similar to many Barolos, you're going to find quite a lot of tannins, and it might be quite difficult to open up your wine. So I do recommend getting a reasonable amount of oxygen in your glass to kind of help you. So first off, we're going to look at the color. For the red wines, particularly if you're unsure, instead of tilting your glass to 45-degree angle, I actually rest my glass on the table and look straight down. Because for me, particularly with these wines that you might consider borderline color-wise, it gives me a much clearer indication of the true color. Yeah, so I'm just going to look straight down on a white piece of paper. Okay, and then I'm going to give it a tilt for the color. So this is a pale garnet wine. Okay, in my glass in particular, I can see not only this ring of the stem here through my glass, but I can see all the way down and just begin to see the outline of the base of the glass. Okay, that's a pale red wine. Okay? And it's garnet. You can see, certainly in mine, you can clearly see this kind of orangey brown rim to the wine. Okay. That's the thing that tips you from ruby into garnet. Okay. So remember, when you're looking for your intensity on the nose, you're looking for how close you have to get to the wine in order to smell the positive characteristics, okay? Not the alcohol, but fruit characters or maybe oak characters. And for me, I'm all the way up here. I can turn so you can see. I'm a real distance away. And I'm getting this huge whack of fruit straight away. So pronounced intensity. And I'm going to start thinking about my clusters, okay? Remember, for WSET, we talk about these clusters of primary, secondary, and tertiary. So first off, I'm going to look for my primary. So these should be the fruit notes you expect from the wine. Now, Sangiovese, you should be looking for red fruit, probably things like cherry or red plum. Also, I get a really distinct herbal character with Sangiovese. So I'm also going to be looking for the herbs. And yeah, straight away, for me, sour cherry, red plum. I also get a really lovely, slightly pomegranate note. Melagrana, I think it is in Italian. I hope it is in Italian. So pomegranate. And then I get the herbs. And for me, there is a reason why my Instagram name is Rosmarino e Vino. Sangiovese is my favorite grape, and I always get rosemary with Sangiovese. The dried herb character is always there for me. Sometimes it presents itself as thyme or something a little bit more musty, but this still has that brightness, that aromatic. And a little tiny bit of blood orange, like a really ripe blood orange. It's very delicate. It's quite impressive how much of that primary character there is because of everything else that's coming. And remember, I said last week, 2 weeks ago, that if you're struggling with different aromas, to move your nose around the glass. So if you're getting too much heavy kind of oak smoke aroma at the bottom here, try lifting your glass to the top. And for me, this is where the aromatics are, okay? This is where that delicate herbal sort of rosemary, lavender, blood orange note is. And as for the secondary and the tertiary, with the secondary, there's a really clear baking spice. So clove, cinnamon, but I also get wood smoke. I get very clear kind of charred wood note. And that will be perfectly acceptable for you to write in a tasting note. Remember, it's not sufficient enough if you're writing your level 3 tasting note just to write oak. That wouldn't be an acceptable thing to an examiner. You have to demonstrate that you know that the oak character is a spice or a smoke or a toast, because oak character is not enough. It's so varied in wines. It's much like you couldn't put red fruit, for example. You need to be clearly designating which fruit you can smell. And then in my tertiary, it's relatively delicate on the tertiary still. I'm getting a little bit of dried fig. So remember, the fresh fruit gradually becomes dried as the wine develops. And a slight kind of dried cherry, maybe a little bit of mushroom. It's relatively delicate on the tertiary still. So when you're thinking about your level 3 tasting note, okay, remember, it's good to put them into these clusters, this primary, secondary, tertiary, but you also need to make a comment on the development of the wine. Okay? And because this wine is still very much defined by that fresh fruit, so that cherry, pomegranate, that red plum, those aromatics, and there's less of that tertiary, I know that this is a developing wine. Okay, you've still got a lot of that primary fruit there. Okay, it hasn't all become dried fruit, so it is not a fully developed. Okay, and it's certainly not tied up past its best. I could sit and smell this all day. It's incredibly impressive, the layers that are in it. So we're going to have a taste, and I'm going to taste in this wine because I know it's Sangiovese. I'm going to taste for sweetness, acid, and tannin in one cluster today, because I know that the acidity and the tannin are going to have a really important interplay. So there's nothing quite like spitting in front of 50 people, no pressure. Okay, so it's dry. There's no hint of sweetness in this wine. The acidity is high, okay? My mouth is watering. There is so much saliva running down my cheeks. And that's a really good thing because the tannins are also still incredibly high. So even though this is a 2014, it's already had oxygen contact in the oak. Remember, oak softens tannins, both new oak and neutral oak. That time in the bottle, that gentle oxygen contact, still very high tannin, okay? And remember, if you're on high in the scale, you're in high, okay? It's not medium plus, it is high for both your acid and your tannin. The other thing I really noticed, taking that first intake of wine and running it through my mouth with some air, is the heat at the back of my throat, okay? You can tell that this wine has high alcohol, okay? It's 14.5%, and remember, because of labeling laws, that could be a little bit higher than that because you have a gradation in your percentages, and I can feel that in the back of my throat, okay? It's very well integrated. I don't think it stands out in the wine in any way. It just so happens that when you take the air in and you push the wine towards the back of your throat, I can really feel it. So I want you to have a taste again and think about body and only body, because this is a very difficult wine for those really struggling with body on wine. And instead of running the air through your mouth, okay, I want you to just hold the wine in your mouth for a couple of seconds and then spit it out or drink it. You're not working, I am. This is a full-bodied wine. And I know many of you are going to try and disagree with me, but you can't. Because when you feel it in your mouth without running the water, without running the air through, okay, when you really focus on it, this wine has a huge amount of texture, okay? And I would invite you to look, if you can run your wine around your glass, at the deposit, the legs, the tiers, very well defined, okay? So this tells you that it helps to tell you that there might be high alcohol in this wine. And remember, alcohol gives body, okay? We correlate body with alcohol and also with tannin. And remember, this wine is high tannin. And in fact, if we could put high plus, I would put this as high plus tannin. The thing that tricks you with this wine is first the color, because everyone expects light, pale wines to be light-bodied. You just make the association in your head, something that's paler is lighter, therefore it's lighter-bodied. But also the acidity. And that's what's incredibly impressive about this wine, this ability to be able to choose from these higher altitude sites, to have this diurnal shift to maintain the acidity in the grapes, okay? It's really high acidity, okay? And this makes your mouth water, and this makes you think it's lighter bodied than it is. It's very, very difficult. You really have to be thinking about this combination of high alcohol, high tannin. Try holding it in your mouth and feeling the thickness and the weight. I've just seen the high plus question mark in the chat. It's a joke. It's just that there is high is as high as you can go, But sometimes there are wines where I just think, I want just that extra. I want that plus. Thank you, Paula. Okay, so taste again for intensity and then flavors. We're looking to see if the flavors that we identified on the nose, so cherry, plum, pomegranate, maybe rosemary, maybe thyme, cloves, smoke, maybe dried fruit, bit of mushroom, seeing whether they come through on the palate and how much of them there are. Okay, so again, for me, the intensity is pronounced. There is a lot going on in this wine. It's exactly like the nose, still very much dominated by this primary fruit character. It's still very fresh, despite the aging, despite the oak, okay? And if anything, it gets more complex the more I taste it. As the wine is opening, as I'm swirling it, I'm getting more and more layers. And the finish, I can still taste the sour cherry and a little bit of that kind of lovely oak char. But the cherry is what dominates for me on the finish. And I think that's really impressive because it does demonstrate this maintenance of aromatics, this focus on primary fruit. Okay? So a long finish. And yeah, I'm just still getting that kind of interplay between the cherry and the oak. The kind of clove char taste is really clear to me. And I don't really get too much of the dried fruit on the palate. There's a tiny, tiny bit of a sour dry cherry, but it's really dominated still by this primary fruit character. So skipping a little bit ahead on from our conclusions, because of that dominance of the primary fruit, if you were writing your conclusion for a level 3, this is drink now but has potential for age, okay? Because you've still got the tannin, you've still got the acid, so you've got the backbone, as we call it, the backbone of the wine, okay? You've still got a little bit of alcohol as well, but because you've got so much primary fruit, you know that this will develop and get better. You can smell a little bit of the development on the nose. You know that that's a positive thing for the wine, this drying of the fruit character. It's not presenting on the palate yet, so you know that this has positive potential to increase as the wine ages. Okay. Just to pick up Luca, how many flavors should we detect in terms of numbers for level 3? You need to be looking, I would always put a minimum of 6 for your nose, a minimum, and then remember that you also have to make a comment on your flavors. You can't just write same as the nose. So again, look for a minimum of 6 if you can. If you're tasting a wine that is simple, okay, that you're struggling with, that would be described by the SAT as simple, using the term simple does count as an aroma mark, okay? So you could say simple and then list 3 things, 4 things. I'm always trying to push my students to list a minimum of 6 if they can get them there, okay? And remember, if you're listing lemon, if you're really struggling, you could always put lime, okay? The key thing is really not to just overthink and list everything you can think of. I have a diploma student from London who is great, but he has a tendency to just get concerned about online, thinks he can't find anything, and he lists everything. And you have a tasting note that looks like the lexicon because he thinks that will gain marks. Unfortunately, it doesn't. But yeah, really try and push to be getting, 4 to 6 aromas minimum, okay? And use this additional language, simple, complex, or simple or generic. So for example, if you're really struggling with a red wine, you could say, this has simple, generic aromas of red fruit, such as strawberry and raspberry, okay? So that would get you part of the way there. You'd still need to find a couple of other things, but that helps you demonstrate to the examiner that you've recognized that there's not a lot going on in the wine, okay? Hopefully that's helpful. So in terms of our conclusion for quality, it's balanced. Remember, it's high tannin, but the acidity is there to make your mouth water, to balance out the drying of the tannins. It's got alcohol, but it's integrated into the wine. You only really notice it if you're looking for it. It's got body, but again, it's not overpowering because of this acidity. So it's balanced, okay? Intensity, it's pronounced on both the nose and the palate, okay? So I can never spell this right. Blick. It's got length. So balance, length, intensity, complexity is what we're looking for in this Blick scale that we use as a guideline. So it has length. Again, I can still taste the cherry as I'm talking to you. It's still there. Okay? And it's got the complexity. It's got primary, secondary, and tertiary characteristics on both the nose and the palate. It's still developing. You know it's going to develop. So I don't think there is any other conclusion other than outstanding for this wine for me. I think it's a very, very good example of what you can do given the aging restrictions of Brunello. Because obviously, you have to, if you're labeling as Brunello, age for certain periods of time in oak and then in bottle. It really demonstrates how you can do that well whilst maintaining the characteristic of the grape. Okay? Because one of the things personally that I'm looking for, and I think is a great sign of quality, which comes through from looking at this Blick scale, this idea of balance, length, intensity, complexity, is being able to maintain character of the fruit whilst also looking at the natural factors and the human factors. Okay. Remember, particularly for level 3, but also at level 2, we are always talking about the natural factors. So here we're talking about the soil, the altitude, the fact that it's warmer and drier in this area of Montalcino and what impact that has, this idea of diurnal range. They're your natural factors. And then the human factors. So the restriction of the aging categories, in this case, the DOCG of Brunello. Also the choice of the winemaker, the stainless steel in order to maintain the aromatics in combination with this use of oak. So hopefully you all agree, those of you who are managing to taste it, that it is an outstanding wine. I will open up to questions. How are we doing for time? I don't have a clock. Okay. So just coming up to 12:30. Let me just follow up on a couple of questions, and then I want to introduce you to someone. The quality of the aroma. Yes, I would say it is very important to define whether or not it is fresh fruit or ripe fruit, particularly when you're talking about berries. So because strawberries, for example, can taste very different when they're fresh to when they're ripe. And also don't forget, you can use cooked or dried. All of these qualifying words will help you to give a more complete tasting note. Okay. And remember, whilst the aim of this session is to combine the theory and the tasting for WSET for the level 2 and level 3 systematic approach, it's also to help you just make better tasting notes. Okay, like you want to learn to get better at understanding what it is you like in a wine, understanding whether you are preferring fresher fruit flavors, more cooked or dried fruit flavors. It's a conversation I constantly have in my house because my husband much prefers riper fruit characters and much richer wines, whereas I tend to prefer the fresher kind of slightly light, not necessarily lighter, but wines with that fresher fruit characteristic, that aromatic. So writing tasting notes in our house helps us define which one of us is going to like the wine more, even though I'm always going to choose the wine. So I hope that that's been helpful for everyone. I hope you've enjoyed it. Stevie, are you with us?
Hello, everybody.
Would you like to
know what today is? Let's wrap this up, and I'll see you guys next time, next week.
Guys, just, I know you've had the list, but for those of you who haven't seen it, I'm trying to get this in focus. We're going to be looking at a Trebbiano d'Abruzzo from 2015 next week. If you can't get this exact wine, try and get yourself a Trebbiano d'Abruzzo with a little bit of age. Okay?
Yeah, you don't have to get like Valentini, you know what I mean? Just get whatever you can. All right? All right, listen, you guys. Thank you, everyone, and see you next week.